Oh, perfect. Okay. Should I list references on my resume? Great question. So no, it's a little bit outdated now to add either references available upon request or adding the references to the resume. But a great way to do that is to have a second document that's formatted just like your resume, so it looks like a nice package of documents. And that way you can provide references as soon as they're asked for, but it's not part of your resume document. So I like to have it as kind of like a second piece to your application portfolio. That's a great question. Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. Should you include a picture or not? And should it be colorful, one tone, or should you use the latest available templates? Okay. Perfect questions. All right. So to be honest about the pictures, I can tell you in the US, it's not a good idea to add a picture. It makes hiring managers uncomfortable. Because they don't want to enter any bias into the hiring process, and so they'd rather not have a picture. So it's not standard in the US. Having said that, it is standard in other parts of the world. And so, if you're looking for a role in, parts of Asia or parts of Europe, then a picture is acceptable. I suggest just erring on the side of caution, not including a picture, but then maybe having that graphic, fun resume, then that can have a picture because it's a little bit more informal. It's a little bit, it has a little bit more personality. But for your formal resume, I would not include a picture, just to err on the side of safety. And then the resume, should it be colorful, one tone, use the latest available templates? Okay, great question. So color is fine as long as it's industry appropriate. If for my clients, if they're in banking, finance, things like that, I don't use color. I usually stick with something, black, white, gray tones, neutral, maybe even navy blue, because it's just a little bit more of a formal industry. But if you're in marketing, sales, technology, something a little bit more modern, an industry that's a little bit more fun, then color is great, and that's not a problem at all, as long as it's not distracting. So don't use anything that's maybe a little bit too many colors, things like that. Like stick with something in the same color family so that it doesn't seem too busy, because you don't want color to take away from the content, but it definitely is something that can be fun to be added a little bit. And then the modern templates. So kind of going back to, if you're going to apply online or if you're going to apply for something formally, I don't suggest using the most modern templates that you can get online. They look great, but they're not going to perform well for you if you apply online. So, use something a little bit more traditional for your actual application, but then those modern fun templates you can use as your networking resume to send directly to a hiring manager after you've submitted your formal resume. Then those are kind of fun to add a little bit of personality. Okay. Oh, yes. Thank you. About if there's been a long career break, should it be mentioned? Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot. I talked about employment gaps and then forgot to tell you about them. Yes, it should be mentioned. I tell my clients, and when I'm writing a resume for someone who has a long career break, you want to address it in the resume because you want to answer any questions the hiring manager might have before you may not get the opportunity to answer because you wouldn't be asked to an interview. So if there's a career break, I like to add a career note. So if there's like two pieces of, two experiences and then maybe say several years of a break, I include a career note in there saying, whatever you were doing, it took time out of the workforce to, raise a family and did these things while I was out of work. And so I like to show what you did during that time. And I know as mothers, I am one, I totally get it. Being a mother is enough. And but if there's anything else you did during that time, volunteer work, anything you did to keep your skills up to date, coursework, any certifications, anything in the community or volunteer projects that you did, include that in there too, just to kind of bolster that time and show what you did with your time. And so, yes, I do like to add a little bit of information in there. And, if you've been out of the workforce for, a long time and your experience, your last paid experience was prior to 10 or 15 years ago, then you bring up a good point. It probably should, add some years then, so that people know when those things happened. But this is a great opportunity to have a resume that has those accomplishments at the very top first, because if your accomplishments are from several years ago, you can include them at the very top and then do chronologically through your experience with the years, and then have the career note saying what you were doing while you were out and how long you were out, so that people just kind of understand what was happening during that time. How to manage a CV in the middle of a career switch? Great question. So if you're in the middle of a career switch, it's hard to only include relevant information if all of your experience is a little bit irrelevant for what you're looking for, and that's totally fine. But this is where it's helpful to get a little bit more. I tell people to take some courses, maybe some relevant certifications. There's a lot of online opportunities through Udemy and Coursera and some other things, locally, that you can help bolster your skills in your new career path. That way you have true things to add to the skills section. That way you can, tailor your skills section to the new career. You can also then add the certifications and things and coursework and things that you've done to your education section to show that you're actively making the switch and that you're doing what you need to do to gain the skills that you'll need to be successful in that new role. And it also, all of that, taking those courses and adding those skills, will help you get through the applicant tracking system to get to an actual hiring manager. The other thing you want to do is in your summary section, really tailor your transferable skills, so the things that you have learned and done in your previous career, and apply them to what you're looking to do in the future, and kind of make that case for why you're switching and what makes you qualified and ready to hit the ground running in this new role. So use that summary section as an opportunity to kind of explain a little bit more about that. The other thing I want to mention about career switching is it's easier to include a little bit more narrative about your switch and why you're looking to make the leap in a cover letter that you attach with your resume. But just know that the cover letter doesn't always come through with the resume. Sometimes they get kind of broken up during the online application process, or as they go from hiring manager to director or whatever, whoever needs it. And so make sure that you also include some of that language in the summary section as well, so that people can see, why you're making the switch. So that's a really great question. Okay, so resumes feature a picture and date of birth and ID card or passport number. Okay, so great questions. I wouldn't include an ID card or passport number. Those are things that you can provide after the interview and after the job has been awarded to you, or later in the process, when they may need some of that information. It's not something they should need right at the beginning. Featuring a picture and a date of birth, this is really a question that I, okay, in the US, things like date of birth, marriage status, and religion, some of those like personal questions are actually illegal to ask in the US. And then pictures are not allowed here as well. And so I know that date of birth is accepted in a lot of parts of the world. I would say leave it off. It's, I did a lot of research before our call, so I know that, I'm not an expert in hiring practices in Pakistan, but I will say, I did a lot of research ahead of our call to look for best practices, and everything I was reading said leave date of birth off. If it's something that they need later, that's fine, but don't add it to your resume. Okay, perfect. And then that is pretty close to the same question, it looks like. So yeah, leave date of birth off, leave personal information off. You can add hobbies if you want. I know we didn't talk about hobbies, if they're relevant or if they're interesting. I know this is not the question that was asked, but I get a lot of questions about hobbies, and that's something that maybe, add hobbies if they are interesting and different. I see a lot of people add like travel and cooking. Those aren't really interesting and different, but if you do something or are really involved in something outside of your relevant work, then maybe that's something fun to add that adds a little bit of personality. What's the worst for resume mistake ever, and something that must be avoided? That's a great question. To me, the worst mistake ever, outside of like funny stuff, but like what I see the most of, and it happens a lot, with women, because we're uncomfortable talking about how great we are, is a really long, dense document that just includes job duties and nothing about your value or the accomplishments or the way that you were able to help the business meet their goals. And so, you want to make sure that you avoid, huge resumes that are really, really long, dense with information, and none of it's really helping advance your career story. I think a lot of times when it can get, a little bit overwhelming to the reader, they just look at it and nothing is really jumping off the page and they just move on. And so that's one thing that I would say, to avoid, either really long or something that just is not telling a good story. And I know it's probably goes without saying, but I know some hiring managers can be very serious about typos and poor grammar. So just to make sure that you have someone else read through the document too, and make sure that it's clean, because it's hard to maybe have a resume that says something like attention to detail and then have it full of typos. So that's something you definitely want to watch out for. Okay, if you've been working as a freelancer during your career and have no proof of published work, how do you write it in your resume? That's a really great question. And because freelance work becomes more and more popular, in the most recent years, a lot of people have freelance work. So what I like to do is include it as an employment section, add that you were freelancing, add the dates during your career break, and then just to make sure that you're not just talking about the type of work that you did, but the kind of clients you were working with. So what I like to do is, say you're a graphic designer. I'm just making an example. Or like a virtual assistant or something like that. So I like to say the work that you did, the years that you were doing it, and then add a couple bullets about the type of clients you were working with. So, created a logo and website design for X and such company that was, trying to do this, and helped them launch their business. As a virtual assistant, helped this kind of company or that kind of an executive do these things. So just add more context to your work. So maybe you don't have an employer that can say, yes, I did this, but you can at least show the kind of work that you did, and add it that way. Another way for graphic designers or people that maybe were in marketing, something a little more visual, you can include the information on in a portfolio website or something like that, so that you can include that, a link in your resume, and that way it can go to a body of work and they can see, oh, okay, well, you really did do some things, because they're all, here's all this information. The other thing is, if you were a virtual assistant or, worked with another company, you can add a link to the company's website. That way they can see, oh, okay, that company is real. It was just a freelance job. And so that's a way to kind of add context and legitimacy to the freelance work, because I know it's definitely still work. I have a virtual assistant that I work with very, very closely, and I know that she was working to get security clearance to work with the U.S. government, and they reached out to me to say, did she really do this work? Was she really here? And I was able to, act as a reference for her. So that's an option too, is to use some of your freelance clients as references. Okay, how to manage an employment gap in a CV. Great, so I know we talked a little bit about this, but just make sure that you're explaining what you did during that time. So it's great to maybe include a little bit of information about maybe why you left the first role. So, they were downsized, or the company closed, or you left to take care of your family, whatever that might be. And then during that employment gap, just add a little career note in the middle between the two roles, and say what you were doing during that time. So try to make it, took some courses, worked on, maybe some freelance projects, did this. Just show that you were active and engaged in either your community or your industry in some way, just to kind of show that you were working on some projects. So if you're returning after an employment gap, like if you're re-entering the workforce now, it's a great opportunity to add some, take some courses right now, and that way you can say, here's some things I've been working on. Even if maybe you just started taking the courses, at least it shows that you're getting reacquainted with best practices in your industry. Okay, so in general, how many sections should a resume have, or number of pages, and how many publications should you mention all? Okay, great question. So, a resume should have as many sections as you need that are relevant. So the ones that you definitely have to have: the summary section, skills, your experience sections, education. So those are the ones you have to have. And after that, some ones that I like to add are languages, technical skills, publications, and speaking engagements, things like that. So those are the sections really, but the main ones are summary, skills, experience, and education. Make sure you have those 4. And after that, you can add whatever else additional information is helpful. Number of page length. I know we talked about this briefly, but the pages should be anywhere from 1 page if you're just coming out of university. But if you are a little bit more experienced than that, or you're mid-career or above, then you really need at least 2 pages, even 3 if the last page is a lot of like certifications, publications, things like that. Maybe if you're in a scientific or education field where you have a lot of publications, then the 3 or 4 page CV is acceptable. Just make sure that whatever you're including is relevant. So don't just have content for content's sake. There's no real standard. I will say, those rules about having to have a 1-page resume are not helpful. So make sure that, you're using the room that you need to tell your career story that's still relevant. So, usually for mid-career and above, it's about 2 pages. Quick question to answer about how many publications to list. I list as many as are relevant, except unless you get older ones. And so, if you have publications from the 90s and before, I leave those off. Not only are they a little bit more irrelevant, but they are aging your resume. And so sometimes then if I take some publications off, I'll include at the top, instead of saying publications, I'll say select publications include, and then some of those. Same thing with if you have some publications that are a little bit older, like maybe 2010-ish, around there, but you don't have anything recent. That's when I would write select publications include as well. That way it kind of alludes to the fact that you have more. You're just including older ones, and so maybe it looks like you've been a little bit more active than you have. So that's a great way to kind of handle your accomplishments. And then what goes first, education or experience? Or the personal statement objective? Objective sounds outdated now, isn't it? Yes. Okay, great questions. So really great question. Experience goes first and education is at the bottom, unless you're just now coming out of university or you're looking for an internship and you're early in your career and your experience isn't as relevant, in which case education goes first. So if you're looking for your first job out of university, list education first. Otherwise, it goes at the bottom. And then yes, the personal statement or objective. Yes, objective is outdated. It's not something you really list anymore. Instead, it's more about that career summary, which is really where you're talking about, your overall career, what makes you qualified to do what you're applying to do, your high level, skills and what is relevant to bring value to the company. And the objective is really outdated because it doesn't really say anything. It's usually something along the lines of looking for a company that I can, grow in a fast-paced environment. They're very general, and so they're not really helping. So summary instead. All right. Okay, so here's my answer to this question. The question is, in our country, leaving a job for personal reasons is very common. Do you think we should mention it in our resume? So in the US, I do suggest listing why you left a role so that it answers the question so that people don't think you were fired and then couldn't find a job. If you leave a role and then you're out for several months or a year or more, if you don't include why, then the assumption that people make is that you were fired and then couldn't get another job and then you were just, hanging out. So I do like to list the personal reasons for why you left. You don't have to list exactly what happened, but say, took a voluntary leave from the workforce to take time out with my family or whatever it is, and then list again maybe some information about what you've been doing to stay current in your field during that time. But yeah, I do list maybe why you left, because that kind of explains why there's a gap. Let's see. Oh, really great question. What's the protocol for sending resumes through email? I've received emails with resumes and attachment, but no subject and nothing in the email body. Really great question. And what really works best is if you're going to send an email to a hiring manager or HR or a recruiter, what I like to do is add in the subject line, your name, and then say, resume for such and such position if it's open, or if you're maybe sending an email to someone that maybe they don't have a role open but you just like to meet them, then say introduction from your name. So for me it'd be introduction from Debra Boggs, and then on the inside you'll attach your resume, but the email body can actually be what you would do for your cover letter. So I like to add the cover letter content to the email body instead of attaching a separate cover letter, because in the email then it shows them exactly who you are, what you're doing, why you're maybe qualified to do what you're applying for, and it leads them to want to open your resume and learn more. So it's called an e-note, really is more of that email body that is a cover letter, a little bit less content than maybe a formal cover letter would have. That's a whole page. This can be a little shorter, but it's just kind of I saw this job opening, blah, blah, blah. Here's why I'm applying. Here's why I like your company. Couple bullets of your accomplishments, looking forward to hearing from you soon, and your name. So it's good to kind of add a little bit of content to that. And it's a great place to put your cover letter content. Okay, so what are key points to writing a resume for an undergraduate student who's finding placement or internship? Should I include my volunteer and unpaid work? Absolutely. Really great question. If you are looking for an internship or your first role out of college, then yes, what I like to do in that case is add a section. So maybe you're doing some part-time roles to pay for university or just living expenses, whatever, and maybe they're not relevant, but sometimes but in college you're doing projects or unpaid work or volunteer work that is relevant. And so I like to add a relevant experience section that includes those unpaid projects, maybe some some class projects, some group work, things like that, just to show the work that you've done, that it's a little bit more hands-on and not just book work, that helps prepare you for the work world. So yes, that is a really helpful way to add that information in, show that you have been applying your knowledge in some way. People shouldn't be expecting you to come out of college with a ton of work experience, and so that's where you definitely put that unpaid and internship work and class projects, stuff like that. Oh, thank you so much, Miriam. Thanks, Farah. It's so great to meet you guys. This has been so much fun. Um, uh, yes, absolutely. 2 to 3 pages, 2 pages is ideal unless you have a lot of information. But yes, if I could have a billboard, anywhere in the world that said anything, it would say, you do not need a 1-page resume. Like, you can go longer. It's not helpful, and you're not able to put all the content that you need, and stuffing it into a 1-page resume. Thank you so much. So great to meet you guys. I want to mention one more thing about LinkedIn. I know it wasn't part of the session, but I do want to include that it is an important part of your job search. According to my research ahead of our call, as late as 2019, I believe there were 2.5 million LinkedIn users registered in Pakistan. So people are using it. So definitely make sure that you've got a professional profile that helps tell your career story along with your resume as well, that we can start connecting with people.